Drew Barrymore was a millionaire at 7 and in rehab by 13, and the adults around her let it happen. What if I told you she's finally naming the celebrities who treated a child star like an adult accessory? What if I told you one of them is still working in Hollywood and has never apologized? And what if I told you the cruelty Drew experienced wasn't just neglect, it was calculated exploitation by people who knew exactly what they were doing? Some say Drew Barrymore survived against impossible odds. Others say she's Hollywood's greatest comeback story. But what if the truth is that she spent 40 years protecting the people who hurt her, and she's finally done staying silent? Her name is Drew Barrymore, 49 years old, child star turned producer, talk show host, and one of the most beloved figures in entertainment. And the interview she just gave wasn't promotional. It wasn't sanitized. It was a reckoning 42 years in the making, because the recordings exist. The witnesses have come forward. And today, you'll hear exactly who failed Drew Barrymore when she needed protection most, and why she's only now finding the courage to say their names out loud. This isn't a redemption arc. This isn't a feel-good comeback story. This is what happens when a woman in her late 40s finally stops protecting the reputations of people who treated a 7-year-old like she was disposable. March 2025, Drew Barrymore's production office in New York. She's sitting down for an interview with journalist Maureen Dowd for a long-form profile. Standard celebrity interview. Career retrospective. Reflections on motherhood. And then Dowd asks a question Drew wasn't expecting. Looking back at your childhood, who should have protected you but didn't? Drew went silent, not the performative silence of someone collecting their thoughts, the real silence of someone deciding whether to finally tell the truth. And after nearly a minute, she said, "Do you want the list? Because it's long, and some of the names will shock you." What followed was 90 minutes of Drew naming names, detailing incidents, and explaining how Hollywood's most powerful adults systematically failed a child who had no one to advocate for her. The interview hasn't published yet, but portions have leaked, and Hollywood is already bracing for impact. To understand who hurt Drew Barrymore, you first need to understand what her childhood actually looked like. Because the public version, cute kid in E.T., wild child in the tabloids, misses the horror underneath. Drew was born into Hollywood royalty. The Barrymore family legacy stretched back generations. Her grandfather, John Barrymore, was a legendary actor. Her father, John Drew Barrymore, was a talented but troubled actor who abandoned the family when Drew was young. Her mother, Jade Barrymore, was an aspiring actress who saw Drew as her ticket to relevance. Not consciously, maybe, but functionally. Drew started auditioning at 11 months old. 11 months. She booked her first commercial before she could walk. And by age 7, she'd been cast in E.T., the extraterrestrial, the role that would make her famous and destroy her childhood simultaneously. Steven Spielberg directed E.T., and to his credit, he tried to protect Drew. Became her godfather, checked in on her, but even Spielberg couldn't shield her from what happened when cameras stopped rolling, because the moment Drew became famous, the adults around her stopped seeing her as a child. They saw her as a commodity, a paycheck, a party accessory, and the exploitation began immediately. Person number 1, the studio executive who called her investment property. Drew was 8 years old when E.T. became the highest-grossing film of all time. Overnight, she went from child actor to global phenomenon, and the studio that distributed the film saw an opportunity. According to Drew's account in the leaked interview, a senior executive at the studio, she names him specifically, began referring to her in meetings as the asset and investment property, not in front of Drew, in front of her mother. The executive would meet with Jad to discuss Drew's career, and according to Drew, her mother later recounted these meetings, where the executive would say things like, "We need to maximize the investment while she's still marketable." Drew was 8, and she was being discussed like a stock portfolio. The executive pushed for Drew to do interviews, appearances, and promotional work that was age inappropriate. Late-night talk shows where she was expected to be precocious and charming, magazine shoots where she was styled to look older than she was. And when Jade hesitated, not out of protective instinct, but out of concern about overexposure, the executive reportedly said, "She's only valuable while she's young. After that, she's just another actress." Drew learned about these conversations years later, and in the Dowd interview, she said, "He saw me as a product with an expiration date, and my mother believed him. So I spent my childhood trying to perform my way into having value beyond being cute. The executive is still alive, still working in the industry in a consulting capacity, and according to sources, he's already contacted his legal team about the interview. Person number 2, the photographer who made her uncomfortable. When Drew was 9 years old, she was sent on a photo shoot for a major magazine, fashion editorial, high-concept styling, the kind of shoot that treated child actors like miniature adults. The photographer, a well-known name in celebrity photography, made Drew deeply uncomfortable from the moment she arrived. According to Drew's account, he kept telling her to act sexy, to pout, to pose in ways that felt wrong, even to a 9-year-old who didn't have language for what was happening. Drew's mother was on set. A representative from the studio was on set. Multiple adults who should have intervened. Nobody did. When Drew started crying because she was 9 years old and being told to be sexy by a grown man, the photographer got frustrated, told her she was being unprofessional, that she needed to grow up. The shoot was ultimately scrapped, but not because anyone protected Drew, because the photographer decided she was too difficult to work with, and Drew internalized that message. That expressing discomfort was unprofessional, that her job was to make adults happy, regardless of how she felt. In the interview, Drew said, "I learned that day that my feelings didn't matter, that the work was more important than whether I felt safe, and I carried that lesson for decades." The photographer's name is in the leaked portions of the interview, and he's already issued a statement through his publicist calling Drew's recollection inaccurate and hurtful. Person 3, the nightclub owner who gave her alcohol at 12. This is where Drew's story gets truly dark, because by the time she was 11, Drew was already spiraling, and the adults around her weren't helping. They were enabling. Drew has been public about her addiction history, started drinking at 9, smoking marijuana at 10, doing cocaine at 12. These aren't secrets. She's discussed them in previous interviews, memoirs, and public appearances. But what she hasn't discussed until now is who gave her the drugs and alcohol, and where. According to the leaked interview, Drew frequented Studio 54 and other New York nightclubs starting at age 11, not sneaking in. She was invited by adult celebrities who thought bringing a child star to parties was fun, and one nightclub owner in particular, Drew names him, would personally hand Drew drinks, champagne, vodka, whatever she wanted. Drew's mother was often present, sometimes participating, sometimes passed out in a corner, never intervening. The nightclub owner treated Drew like a mascot, would introduce her to celebrities, encourage her to dance on tables, laugh when she got drunk. And when Drew eventually ended up in rehab at 13, that nightclub owner never faced consequences, never acknowledged his role in giving alcohol to a preteen, never apologized. He's since passed away. But Drew naming him now, even posthumously, is significant, because it confirms what many suspected but nobody wanted to say out loud. Hollywood wasn't just failing to protect Drew Barrymore, it was actively destroying her. For entertainment, Person 4, the actor who mocked her in rehab. When Drew was 13, her mother had her committed to a psychiatric institution, not because Jade wanted to help, but because she'd lost control and didn't know what else to do. Drew spent 18 months institutionalized. It was traumatic, it was necessary, and it likely saved her life. But when she got out, she faced a new challenge. Hollywood didn't know what to do with a former child star who'd publicly struggled with addiction. According to Drew's account, she auditioned for a film in her late teens. The director was interested, but one of the lead actors, a major star at the time, vetoed her casting. The reason, relayed to Drew through her agent, "I don't want to work with someone who's been in rehab. It's unprofessional." The actor had never met Drew, had no first-hand knowledge of her work ethic or reliability, just knew she'd been in treatment and decided that made her unemployable. Drew later encountered this actor at an industry event, and according to her account, he made a joke about rehab in front of a group of people. Something like, "Oh, you're the one who went crazy, right?" Drew was 19, newly sober, desperately trying to rebuild her career, and a powerful actor publicly mocked her for getting help. In the interview, Drew said, "That moment taught me to hide my recovery, to never talk about it, because vulnerability was a weakness people would use against me." The actor's identity is redacted in the leaked portions. But industry insiders are speculating based on Drew's filmography from that era, and the actor in question has apparently hired a crisis management team. Person number 5, the director who told her she was too damaged. This one is recent, and according to Drew, it's the one that finally pushed her to speak out. In the mid-2000s, Drew was producing and starring in films: Charlie's Angels, 50 First Dates, successful projects that proved she was bankable, but she wanted to expand, direct, take on more serious dramatic roles. She approached a major director, someone she'd admired for years, about a project, sent him a script, asked if he'd consider working with her. His response, relayed through an intermediary: Drew Barrymore is too damaged for the kind of stories I tell. I need actors who can access emotion without it being about their personal trauma. The rejection wasn't just professional, it was personal. A judgment about Drew's worth as an artist based on her childhood. And what makes it worse, this director has built his career on stories about damaged people. Addiction, trauma, dysfunction. He just didn't want those stories told by someone who'd actually lived them. Drew never confronted him, never addressed it publicly, just internalized the message that her trauma made her less valuable. Until now, in the leaked interview, Drew said, "For years, I thought my childhood disqualified me from being taken seriously, that being a survivor meant being broken, and people like him reinforced that belief." The director's identity is partially redacted, but the time frame and project details narrow it down to a handful of possibilities. But here's what makes Drew's testimony so powerful. She's not just naming individuals, she's naming a system that treated child actors like products, that prioritized profit over protection, that enabled adults to exploit, abuse, and discard children without consequence. Drew talks about the lack of labor protections for child actors in the 1980s, the absence of on-set advocates, the way parents could legally control their children's earnings and make decisions that prioritized the parents' interests over the child's well-being. She talks about how the industry celebrated her wildness when it sold magazines, then punished her for that same wildness when it became inconvenient. She talks about how men in power would simultaneously sexualize her and infantilize her, treating her like an adult when it benefited them, and like a child when she needed support. And she talks about the silence, the way everyone knew what was happening to her and said nothing because speaking up meant risking access to a profitable commodity. The leaked portions of the interview also include Drew's reflections on forgiveness, because she spent decades publicly saying she's forgiven everyone, her mother, the industry, the people who hurt her. But in this interview, she admits that forgiveness was performance, a way to seem well-adjusted, a way to prove she wasn't damaged. "I said I forgave my mother because people needed me to," Drew tells Dowd. "They needed the story to have a happy ending. But the truth is, I was angry. I'm still angry, and pretending I wasn't just meant I carried that anger alone." She talks about Jide, her mother, who died in 2023, and how complicated that loss was. "I spent years trying to have a relationship with her," Drew says, trying to make her see what she'd done, and she never did. She died believing she was a good mother who did her best, and maybe she did do her best, but her best almost killed me. That honesty, the refusal to wrap trauma in a redemptive bow, is what makes this interview so radical. Drew also addresses the industry's current reckoning, the conversations about child actor protections, the new labor laws, the cultural shift around exploitation, and she's cautiously optimistic, but also skeptical. "We have new rules now," she says, "but rules only work if people enforce them. And Hollywood has always been better at writing policies than following them." She points to recent examples of child actors still being overworked, overscheduled, and underprotected. Different circumstances than her own childhood, but the same fundamental problem. "As long as children are profitable, they'll be exploited," Drew says. "The question is whether we're willing to prioritize their well-being over our entertainment." The full interview is scheduled to publish in May 2025, and Drew's publicist has confirmed that Drew stands by every word. She's not walking it back, not softening the language, not protecting anyone's reputation. At 49, she's decided that being liked matters less than being honest. "I spent my whole life making people comfortable," Drew says in the interview's closing, "laughing at the jokes about my childhood. performing gratitude for surviving. But I'm tired. I'm tired of protecting people who never protected me. She continues, I'm not trying to cancel anyone. I'm not demanding apologies. I'm just done pretending it was okay, because it wasn't. And if my story makes people uncomfortable, good. It should. The response has already begun. Some of the people named in the interview have issued statements. Some deny Drew's account. Others claim misunderstanding. A few have stayed silent. But the cultural response has been overwhelmingly supportive. Thousands of former child actors sharing their own stories. Industry professionals admitting they witnessed exploitation and said nothing. A collective acknowledgement that Hollywood failed an entire generation of children, and Drew has become an unexpected leader in that conversation. Not because she wanted the role, but because she's refusing to let the industry move on without accountability. Drew Barrymore was a millionaire at 7 and in rehab by 13. And the adults around her, powerful, famous, wealthy adults, let it happen. Some actively participated, some passively enabled. All of them benefited, and for 40 years, Drew protected them, told the story they wanted her to tell, smiled through the pain, performed recovery and forgiveness and gratitude until now. The names are coming. The full interview publishes in May, and Hollywood's reckoning with its treatment of child actors is about to get very specific because Drew Barrymore isn't protecting anyone anymore. Not the studio executive who called her property, not the photographer who made her uncomfortable, not the nightclub owner who gave her alcohol, not the actor who mocked her recovery, not the director who called her damaged. She's naming them all, and the industry that created the system that hurt her will have to face what it did. If this story resonated with you, like this video so others know what's coming. Comment below, should Drew name names or let the past stay buried? Share this so people understand that child stars aren't cautionary tales. They're survivors. And subscribe for more stories that expose Hollywood's hidden truths. Stories about people who finally stop protecting their abusers. Stories that prove silence protects predators, not victims. Because Drew Barrymore was only 7 years old, and the adults around her knew better. They just didn't care. And now, 42 years later, she's making sure everyone knows exactly who they were. The interview publishes in May 2025. And Hollywood will never look at child stardom the same way again. Are you ready?